Hello, world. We're going to get started in a couple minutes here, so just hang tight, and we will begin our presentation on the OMB Regulations project. Let me set up my screen to share. Put on some background music in the meantime. Sorry about the loud music. We'll get started in a second here. For those of you who joined, we're just getting all the presenters loaded in. We've got a lot to show. Okay, howdy. We're going to kind of get rolling. I think folks are kind of coming in slowly. We've got one presenter working on getting there. Oh, I got to stop. Sorry. The explanation for that music was the OMB team that's working with us on this is aptly named the A-Team. So that was our little hold music for the demo. So hello, my name is Will Sullivan. I'm a project manager at 18F, and we're doing the first live demo of OMB e-regulations, the project with OMB and the 18F team that works on e-regulations. I'll give you a little overview about our process and team, and then we'll kind of demo some of the work that's been done in the past week. This is our first bi-weekly sprint, and at 18F we work in the open. Almost everything we do is open source and shared. And the e-regulations team has actually been one of the pioneers in doing these kind of live streamed demos that allow to an archive and a way to kind of share out information widely, but also track and follow along. So we're live streaming this, so anyone can view it, see it in the future. They're not published publicly on YouTube; they're published unlisted. So you have to find the playlist to view it. But this is just a way to kind of keep an archive of all the work that we're doing and the progress that we're making. All of our work is published on GitHub, and you can check it out. The link is at the end, but if you want to go now, it's github.com/18f/omb-eregs. And there's not a lot of work there at the moment because we're just starting out, but everything we do will be published there and tracked there. So with that, this presentation is being recorded. If you see something in this and you want to share it with a colleague, the same URL that you're watching right now, you can share with someone else or go back and rewatch it if you'd like. So with that, hopefully we'll get the third presenter on in time, but we're going to proceed and dive into the sprint demo today. So up first, we have John Donmoyer in Chicago, who is going to talk about the research plan, the work we did in the past 2 weeks from January 9th to January 20th. Usually these will be on the Friday of the closing of the sprint, but because of the inauguration on Friday, we bumped to today. So with that, I will pass to John, and then we will have Siam talk about data analysis and prototypes, Teresa talk about ATO work, and then we'll wrap up. And now I will hand it over to John.
All right. Can you hear me okay, Will? Testing.
John, I think you got the screen? Yep, I can hear you.
Cool.
And you've got control, I think, so rock and roll.
All right. Yeah, so my name's John. I'm a designer here on this project. And what I'm going to talk about today is just our first couple weeks talking about how we're approaching this through user research. And so we came up with a bit of a user research plan, and we're going to walk through that today. So basically, we're seeing this as at least sort of two phases, or two that we have kind of scoped out now. And the first phase is what we're calling generative research. So this is really the phase where we're hoping to learn more about the policy environment in OMB, learn how agencies interact with and consume OMB policy guidance, and just overall kind of get our footing, and before we start coming up with design solutions, understand the problem space a little bit better. So we have a few areas of focus that we're going to try to hit on in our user research. First of which is, how do people use OMB policy in their day-to-day work? How do people find the documents or requirements they're looking for? What are their biggest pain points? How are the documents written? What do people research most often? What are they looking for when they're researching? And what types of documents make people feel confident in their research? So these are just kind of like the cornerstones of the discussions that we plan on having. Obviously, as we speak with people, I'm sure we're going to learn a lot of things that we didn't even know that we needed to know. So this is kind of where we're starting off. And in this phase of research, we want to talk to a few different users from different types. So first, we want to talk to some of the OMB desk officers to learn what their experience is like. We want to talk to some agency representatives who work on implementing policy. So these are people who are out in agencies, and they're sort of reading the things that would be on the OMB site. We want to talk to agency CIOs and CTOs or their staff to kind of learn the big picture of how they're dealing with policy. Maybe they have people that they're working with that are having to explain the policy to them. Maybe they're looking up some of this policy themselves. We don't know a whole lot about that yet, so we want to look into that more. And then also some of the OMB policy writers to understand a little bit better the challenges that they might face when they're trying to write policy. And then phase two, this is kind of, once we have that first phase, we have some ideas and we know enough to start prototyping some solutions that we can then test out with some people. And we want to, this is kind of like, once we have an idea of what we want to build based on the generative research, we'll have enough information to build a prototype of a tool to help solve those problems. And then we'll be testing and iterating upon that tool to make sure it meets the user needs. So in this phase of research, some of the things we'll be focusing on are how will our tool fit into our users' current processes? Will the tool improve their current process at all? Is the tool intuitive and easy to use? And is there anything missing from the tool that will improve the tool even more? And we'll talk to some of the same kinds of people that we talked to the first time around. This time, the conversations will be a little bit different because now there will be a tangible thing that we can kind of get feedback on and sort of take the discussion a little bit further then with that knowledge. And aside from, I don't have a slide for this, but another thing we did this first week on the design side of things was to take a look at a lot of the policy documents that are already out there, to do a bit of a content inventory to kind of understand how they're structured and the different parts that documents have. And that's going to help us when we have to design new solutions to understand all the different variables that we'll have to design for. So, document headers, different metadata, how we want to display that, all that kind of thing. So, yeah, those were some of the things we did the first couple weeks here. And I think, looks like CM just hopped on. So I am going to pass this off to him for some discussion about the data analysis and prototypes.
Excellent. That was just in the nick of time. CM, I'm making you the presenter now.
Oh,
there we go. Awesome.
Oh dear.
Okay, let's do this. So, okay, so we've got a few data visualizations and prototypes to get the creative energies flowing, juices. Anywho, so we didn't have user feedback yet, but we did have access to a data set. And we could look at that data set and try to pull out useful information. So part of that data set is a list of the documents, that is the policies, and those policies have particular attributes. For example, they have types. And if we look at our data set, which I believe is just half of the relevant IT policies, we can see that the majority of the policies, as indicated by these blue, are memos. Some of them are circulars. Let me zoom in a little bit. So we've got this big cluster of memos, and we have 3 other policy types. Those policies also have dates that they're published, and some of them have sunset dates. And so we could visualize that data by looking at it through a timeline. We can see that many policies were issued in the 2010-2012 range, but there's always been kind of a background radiation of policy issuances. Only 2, at least in the data set that we have sunset dates, and so they're indicated here. This isn't a user interface as much as it is just a way to look at the data that we already have. I'm not sure that having a timeline would be particularly helpful for our users. Here's another visualization. Each of those policy documents have requirements within them. So if I zoom in, we can see that policy 82 has, what, 24? Just a little bit over 24 specific requirements within them. So each requirement is something like a sentence or 2 that's explaining this is what must be done. And if we look at this in the abstract, there's one here, I believe this is policy number 6, that has literally hundreds of requirements, but most documents, most policies have a few dozen requirements. And what this means is that we don't have a specific range that's like a normal size for a policy. Some policies have a lot of requirements, some have very few, and there are many that are in the middle that have a few dozen. So if we're thinking about how to view a policy, just thinking about the scroll size would be very, very different because they have different amounts of content. This is a visualization which doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it's by keyword. So the red circles are keywords associated with the blue policies. And it's a big smashed together mush. And what that indicates is that there's little correlation between keywords, that if a policy has one keyword, it's not very likely to have another. We can't disentangle the two. But what we can do is go through all of the policies that we have. So here there's a paragraph for every single one of the policies that we have, and tag them with which keywords apply. So we've got cloud, data centers, shared services. If I highlight on any of them, it'll tell us exactly what keywords are there. And using that, we can filter. We can say, I only want to see acquisition and agency statistics. So this is a potential interface. There's this other category of keywords where individual policies will have their own specific keywords. And we can see that if we go through these, there's only a few policies, only a few requirements for each. All right, another visualization of verbs. So OMB has been kind enough to try to pull out the specific verb that was used within each requirement. And so we can see that there's a lot of, so red here indicates a verb, blue again is a specific requirement. So there's a lot of verbs that are only used once. But there are these 4 verbs that are used very often, and they are shall, must, will, and I can't remember the last one. But diving into the data, we see that yeah, shall and should are right next to each other. There's will, must, etc. But these are the text within the requirements themselves. So there's another version of this that tries to split it into categories of verbs. So there's these 3 priority-related verbs, like must, will, required would fall into that category of this must happen. Then there are should verbs, which are it is recommended that the agency do X, Y, Z, or the agency should do X, Y, Z by a date. And then may, which is like allowing the agencies to do something that they might want to do, but OMB might not want them to do. So it's more of a, you are permitted. Then several of the verbs can be their specific actions, like establishing or creating or making, things of that nature. And then there are these definitional verbs, which are things like this definition includes or excludes X, Y, Z. And there's this other category. So you can see that the majority of the verbs that are picked out are related to priority. And within that, the majority of the priority verbs are must. So the agency has to do something. But this allows us to sort the text by how important it is, that priority. And so here we see that we've gone through and bolded and made red all of the verbs that are of priority, and sorted them by how important that priority is. And we see that, like I showed before, the large majority of these are high priority. Let's get to, yeah, may, which is the second level of priority, doesn't begin until over 2/3 of the way through. This also color codes the categories. So blue is those actions I was talking about before, and green is include, exclude. So we could think about having an app that sorted the requirements by their priority. Here we've got by agency. And so the red circles are the agency names, and the blue circles are the requirements, the rules. So we've got a few different clusters. Let me check something. Yeah, okay. So again, this uses the text that's within the requirement itself. We can kind of standardize that and clean that up. And so this visualization will give us a little bit more data. So we're combining, for example, some requirement might say for all CFO agencies. Others might say for CFO Act agencies. And this just kind of buckets those. So I'll let it settle a little bit. And we can see already that there is one big category here, one big category here, and then kind of a mush here. If we look at that mush, we see that these are specific agencies. So we're saying the DoD, DOE, FEMA, et cetera, have to follow these policies, these requirements. And there aren't too many of them in the grand scheme of things. GSA happens to have quite a few that are specific to it. But the vast majority of the requirements are for these 2 big groups. So this is the CFO Act agencies, which you can see when it bounces in and out. And up here are the executive agencies. So this means that the majority of the requirements are applied to Executive or CFO Act, which is a subset. And maybe a quarter or so of the policies apply to specific agencies. So we can use a similar filter like we did before, but looking at the agencies. And we can say these are the categories. We've got CFO Act, executive agencies, and the Federal CIO Council. And it will filter to just the requirements that are relevant to that specific group. Or we could filter to a specific agency. So GSA is going to have GSA-related things that are specific to GSA, as well as anything that's specific to CFO Act or executive branch. This one's specific to OMB and GSA. So this is a potential additional interface. Finally, we start to get back into eregs-like stuff. And so we have within that data a breakdown of where each requirement is within the document. So we have this kind of context. And it creates a hierarchy, it creates a tree. And so we can go through that tree and say, all right, this is context, so we're going to make it gray, so it's harder to read. But the verbs, will make them red and bold. And this gives you a sense of you're reading the requirements within the context of the policy document they're in. We can also, there are citations, and we can say, all right, this is a citation, it links somewhere. This is, like I said, this is very similar to eRegsy stuff. Even more so, we can break it up very similar to how we do in eRegs, where we have a table of contents on the left and the content on the right. So here, the table of contents are the specific policies, the documents. And we can see that we can jump to any requirements within this specific policy. Even more eRegsy, we can include the entirety of the policy text. This is policy 60, and I actually copy-pasted the whole text in to get us a sense of how much of a specific document would be a requirement, how much wouldn't. So here, all of the gray text is fluff text. It's non-requirement text. All the text that has a background is a requirement. And we've gone through and done the nesting. So you can see that it goes down to I's here, Roman numerals here. We've done the titles, and the verbs are red, just to give you some sense. So you can see in this document, there's like a chunk in the middle that is all requirements. And then it's sandwiched in between inconsequential data. Two more quick demos, and these aren't from our work. These are other organizations that do something similar. So this is a document in what's called Document Cloud. And this is a tool that's used by journalists. And so they see the original document as a PDF, and they go through and they highlight specific sections and add notes to them. So this is just a footnote for the journalist who's reading this. They're saying that this particular text is important. This might be another interface we could look at where we're highlighting specific chunks but displaying it within the context of the original PDF. Finally, I wanted to show, if I can zoom in a little bit, this is work out of Stanford called the Regulation Assistance System. More or less what they do is they codify a regulation into a logic language and then build an expert system on top of that. So someone who is interested in section 71 of this particular regulation would be asked a series of questions. In this case, it's an EPA regulation, so these are all about oil. And based on the way that they answer, skip over this, the system can tell them whether or not they're in compliance. And it gives them metadata about each of those questions. So based on all of these answers, we can see whether or not they were in compliance. Anyway, those are just thoughts, and I will turn it back to Will now.
Excellent. And I will share my screen. And actually, Teresa is going to, she's on, and I think we can hear her.
I'm here.
Awesome. I'm going to advance the slide, and she's going to talk a little bit about the ATO work we've done. Go ahead.
Awesome. So hi, folks. My name is Teresa. I'm a developer here on the project. I've been working on some, it's not going to be nearly as pretty as the stuff Sam has shown you. We're just going to be looking at a slide, but I've been working on some ATO documentation. So ATO, if you don't know, means authority to operate. And it is a document that we need to have in place and sign before we can actually go live. So I've been working on doing things like taking documents that we have already had completed for the ATF e-regulations project, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Bureau, and updating them with our specific information about our ATO officials. I've been also setting up automated tools that will need things like Travis CI, which is a platform that will build our project after we make changes to the code base. We also have tools set up that will track our code quality over time. So we're in a pretty good place to get started. Lastly, I've just been sort of in our repository. You'll see it on GitHub. It's github.com/18f/omb-eregs. Just working on some documentation for the public so that they can sort of, if they come to the page, understand what's happening and what we're working on a little bit better. That is all for me. I will pass it back to Will.
Excellent. And that's going to wrap our demo for this week. This was, again, the first of many 2-week demos that we do at that cadence of every 2 weeks. We complete what we call a sprint, and the next one will be Friday, February 3rd. And projects that we're going to be working on in the next 2 weeks is starting interviews with OMB subject matter experts, recruiting and starting interviewing agency users, beginning sketching solutions, and the admin interface, trying to organize that. And that's about it. Thank you all. We'll see you on the internet. Feel free to share this link with other folks. And if you have any questions or need anything, you can contact us at our GitHub repo. Again, that's github.com/18f/omb-eregs. Or you can email me at will.sullivan@gsa.gov, and I can share it with the team. And also we have a team email, eregs@gsa.gov. And that's EREGS@gsa.gov. Thank you, everyone. Have a fantastic afternoon.